Halloween, y'all. I'm super excited to join you. Halloween, honestly, is one of my favorite holidays. Yeah, even though I have no children, I live in a community that has so many children that they're on the text chain right now saying they're going to bring the fire pit out. It's 40 degrees here, and have adult beverages and lots of candy for the kiddos. So I bought 15 pounds and hopefully I don't run out this year, but if I do, then it's just time for me to watch movies. All right, so let's jump in. I hope everyone else has good evening plans too. Today's real estate market, it is really difficult when we look at housing affordability and interest rates and inventory. So let me show you all the bad news first. Then I'm going to show you how folks are grappling with this, how they're entering into the real estate market, ways that they're finding. When we look at the real estate market today, let's take a look first at interest rates. I think this is one of the most important factors as we look at who is able to actually purchase a home today, but then also potential sellers and if they're actually going to budge from their place. When we look at rates, what we know is that the red bar right there is at 7.74%. That is the median interest rate over the entire span that we have here, dating back to 1971 to today. When we look at that, we are right at that point actually today. So the interest rate today, when we compare this to the recent low of 2.65%, that's not normal, but it's also not normal to be at that high of 18% or 13%. That's also not normal that we saw back in the 1980s. So we're right at the norm right now. Unfortunately, we're coming out of a time period when a lot of people purchased a home who had no expectation of actually purchasing a home, but because of the pandemic, because of the need for more square footage, the need to have a home office or two home offices, a study space for a child, but also a yard, a lot of people jumped into the market and suddenly realized that they could afford perhaps a bigger property than they were in before because of the drop in interest rates. If someone was to purchase a home today, and we're going to take a home that's $400,000, that's the median cost of a home in the US today. If someone was going to purchase a home at $400,000 and they were going to do that when interest rates were at 2.65%, the lowest point, compared to today, they would be paying approximately $1,000 more per month for that mortgage. And that is really hard for a lot of families to fathom, $1,000 more per month, which could go to a whole host of other expenses, such as childcare costs, student loan debt, groceries, etc. So there's a lot of people who may be staying put, and that's really drastically impacting the inventory situation that we're in as well. When we look at affordability, it's really important to encompass not just the interest rate, but also the household price and the cost today just to purchase that home. Again, the red bar is the average since 1981 to today as we look at housing affordability and just the percent of income that is going towards housing costs. The average is 20.4% as the average. Right now, what we see based on today's income, the total cost of housing, interest rate, and the cost of the home, we're looking at 29% of income going towards housing. So we do know that we're really drastically cutting into affordability and who can actually afford to purchase a home today. You have to have a higher income to be able to compete in today's housing market. Also, more bad news. When we look at housing inventory, we know that the inventory is drastically reduced. If we look at this coming out of the Great Recession, we had about 4 million units in the marketplace. We had a first-time home buyer tax credit that brought a lot of first-time home buyers in and encouraged them to actually purchase a home at that time period. Then we just kept losing inventory. And part of this is because of underbuilding. Some of it is due to mobility and people just not moving as often as they had before. But regardless of the reason, we just were missing inventory. As we look at this, before the pandemic, we had about 2 million units in the marketplace, and we were ringing the alarm bells that we need more housing inventory. We need to bring it in. Today, we have about 1 million units, give or take, on a monthly basis in the market. And so that is really a significant issue. We also know that there is quite a bit of demand out there for this limited inventory. For every home that's listed, they're receiving an average of 2.6 offers for that home, meaning that there is still multiple offer situations that are going on. A quarter of homes are moving more than the asking price, indicating that there are bidding wars for about a quarter of homes that are listed. If we look at the high water mark there, that's 5.5 offers for every home that was listed. That's right before interest rates started rising. And so at that time period, there was a lot of competition in the market, and a lot of people said, I want to lock in these low interest rates. This is my last chance to do so. And so we saw a lot of multiple offer situations. It's declined from that time period. You can see in recent months, it's actually trailed off because of the rise in rates as well. But during the summer months, we did actually see more than 3 offers for every home that was listed. But right now, we're still stronger than the norm. A factor that's going on in the real estate market that I think is really different and makes today's market very unusual is that we are actually seeing 29% of recent home buyers are paying all cash. They don't care about interest rates at all because they're an all cash buyer. When we see this, before the pandemic, this number was in the high teens. Since that time period, homeowners rather have earned a tremendous amount of housing equity on their home. And so they're able to make a trade without actually having to take on a mortgage. We also know that among all cash buyers, half of older boomers are actually likely to be paying all cash. So in that scenario, we know that they've been homeowners for a significant period of time. They're now buying a retirement property. And so if there's a multiple offer situation on a home, that all cash buyer is likely to win out. So we're likely going to continue to see that this is a number that's really outperforming what the norm is in the marketplace. I also would like to point out too that these are home buyers who are likely moving very long distances. So expensive coastal areas in the mainland, moving into southern states. And I'll show you a map on this too, but I think it's important to just note that these aren't necessarily local movers who are staying close to home, and they may be moving longer distances. Excuse me, I've been on the phone a lot today. Okay, non-primary residence buyers. As we see this number, it's at 18% of the marketplace today. And I think that this is really interesting. 15% is actually the historic norm on this number. At 22%, we actually saw a high. And that was when inventory was at the lowest number that we've actually ever recorded. I think that there was a lot of non-primary residence buyers, investors who jumped into the market at that time period and said, I want to flip a home. And so they jumped into the market thinking that they could either Airbnb or VRBO that property, but also they could be a short-term landlord, but also a long-term landlord. And at that time period, we also know that interest rates were at a low before they started rising. So I think folks came in and they said, this gives me an opportunity to sell this home at a profit with housing equity in the long term, but also in the short term, this gives me an investment opportunity as well. When we see it at 18%, I do think that this is an indication that investors are still seeing opportunities in the market. They also are likely to be all cash buyers as well, so not wedded to this interest rate. And with the expectation that home prices will rise and that interest rates will drop, there is an opportunity to resell this home moving into 2024 or in the future. One of the things that I think is really important about today's housing market that is a very good thing is that we don't see distressed sellers right now. We actually know that the typical homeowner has been in their home for a decade and they have about $200,000 in housing wealth. And so with that, they are very unlikely to encounter a scenario where they could not sell their home with housing equity. If we look at this back in 2009, About half of realtors were actually working with a distressed seller at that time period. So it was a very different time period from what we see now, where this is just bouncing around 0 to 1 to 2% on a monthly basis, but really not significant growth in this number. It really is a very different housing paradigm than what we have seen in the past. And we know that there is very tight lending that has been going on right now for those who are obtaining a mortgage on a property. We don't see subprime lending. You have to have a high credit score. You have to be able to document your income. And one of the things that I am hearing about and getting questions about is actually seeing more ARMs come into the market. And what I would say is that for first-time home buyers, especially, this could be an opportunity to have a lower interest rate. We also know that that is a conventional loan product. It's not subprime lending, and that makes me feel less uncomfortable with that. It could be an opportunity for potential buyers out there. When we look at the inventory situation, I want to say that there is some silver lining. We know that housing starts on a monthly basis. It's been bouncing around a lot, actually. Some months it goes up and we get really excited, and then it goes back down, and then we get concerned. I'll give you a couple of silver linings here. One is that housing permits do seem to be up, which means that there is an indication that in the near future, perhaps housing starts will also go up. Permits leading housing starts by a couple of months. We know that builders have to borrow money to be able to build. So it could be an indication that they expect the interest rates will go down into 2024 as well. The other silver lining that I'm going to give here too is that when we look at home building, traditionally it takes about 6-7 months for a home to be built. During the pandemic, that time period lengthened because it was so hard to obtain skilled labor. It was hard to obtain all goods within a home, whether that was ordering an appliance, the shortage of nails, the silicone to hold down beautiful quartz and granite countertops. Everything seemed to be in shortage. Matte paint was hard to find in the DC area. You had to drive 100 miles to find a can of paint. It really was pretty extraordinary, the circumstances that we were in. It became very difficult to build a home. And so now we're actually seeing that the length of time to build a home is shortening from that extended period. It's not as short as what it once was at those 6 to 7 months, but it is getting shorter, and that's good. The other thing that I'll say here too is that demographics is changing. People are living for a longer period of time, and they're staying put in their homes that they have been living in, not moving necessarily into a nursing home. We also know that a lot of people are saying, you know what, I want to move in with family. I want to double up with my family in a multi-generational home and not necessarily move into a nursing home or assisted living. And I think family support to each other has really changed coming out of the pandemic. The other thing that's happening at the same time is there's a lot of young adults moving into the housing market, and this is putting pressure on the inventory situation and continuing to push home prices. This is the new forecast that was released just at the end of last week. This is from Dr. Lawrence Yun, our chief economist, and is the latest and greatest forecast. So let's walk through this. In the next 6 months, he does expect that the 30-year fixed will go down. This is very good news. This could alleviate pressure on home buyers that could allow them to actually come into the market who are priced out. But the other good thing is that it could actually motivate sellers who they are in a home that is not working for them to actually reconsider their property. So whether that's someone who has a new job or a new baby, a new marriage, they need a new property, but the home is not working, this could actually help them. We do expect that throughout 2024, and the forecast does go throughout 2024, but I thought the next 6 months is probably the most pressing to show here, that interest rates will go down. On the flip side of that is that home sales would go up because we're allowing more buyers to come into the market. We also expect that existing prices are going to be relatively flat, but going up. What I would note here is that in some areas of the country, we're still seeing double-digit home price gains. Well, in some areas of the country, there's been some softening of that, and home prices have stayed about flat. So there's a lot of difference within both price categories, but also in location of the country. What is EHS? Very good question. Existing home sales. Thank you for asking that question, as opposed to brand new home sales like housing starts. All right, let me keep going. All right, I want to talk a little bit about built for rent. This is essentially a product where we have a brand new single family home, but that home is not actually available for purchase for a family to move in. It's actually a rental property. And this is something that we actually have seen an increase growth in. And we can actually see that dating back to 1974, we're actually at an all-time high of this type of property that is being built right now. What I would say here is that I think that builders have started to understand how difficult it is for first-time homebuyers to enter into the market, and have seen that first-time homebuyers are older than they have been historically. With that, that means that there's more renters who may be looking for a single family property as opposed to a smaller apartment unit. They're going to need a larger property. Unfortunately, what this means is that while we see housing starts go up, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a one-for-one transfer and that this would be a unit for a family to move into to own. It could actually be a rental property. If we look at this regionally, there's quite some difference here. The Midwest is actually the place where there's the most building of this property type. But what we can see if we look at the West region, which is where Hawaii would be included in the data for census, we are seeing growth in this at 7%. It's the lowest number out of any other region, but it is a significant growth here. One of the things that I think is quite important to look at too is just migration patterns. It's actually been hitting the news the last couple of days using census data. In our analysis, we actually used USPS change of address data. Oopsie. And what I want to show you here is just what we got back when we looked at all of 2022, noting that we're at the very end of October now. I have 2023, so this could have changed somewhat. Anything in red, we saw population move from. Anything in blue, we saw population move to. What I will say is that we do seem to be seeing a population move from Hawaii, largely likely due to housing costs, but also the cost of living. This is something that in many areas of the country where it is very expensive to buy a property to live, people are traditionally moving from those areas. I will be very excited to see the 2023 data to see if these migration patterns hold up, or if we continue to see these changes here. The other caveat that I will give when we look at this heat map that we are doing at NAR is that because this is USPS change of address data, we're picking up renters in this data too, so not just home buyers. What is important though is that people continue to move long distances. And when we look at this historically, people move just 10 to 15 miles, but in the last year, the median miles moved actually skyrocketed to 50. And we have actually seen that a quarter of home buyers actually moved 470 miles or more. This is very unusual. And some of this is pandemic driven. Some of it is remote work driven. Some of it is because we see the predominant movers today are actually baby boomers, and they would be likely to be moving long distances as well. One of the big trends that I think that is impacting here is actually the number of home buyers who are purchasing a home without physically seeing it. They're actually FaceTiming, they're using technology with their agent hand in hand to see that home, but they're not physically seeing it themselves. When we look at this, what we can see is it's 9% of home buyers in the last month worked with a realtor and actually purchased that home sight unseen, so 1 in 10. We know that this is likely a lack of inventory situation too, that home is going to be under contract quicker than perhaps that buyer can get there, especially if that home buyer is the one who's moving 500 miles or more. All right, I want to give you a little bit of generational data here. This is shifting gears completely from where we are, but I think that we should really talk about this because there's some pretty big changes that we're seeing here. This is the US population overall. So every single person in the US is represented in this chart. We have little kids born in the last few years represented in green. And then with mortality rates, unfortunately, we just don't see that many folks making it past 95 years old. But if you're on the call and you're past 95, congratulations, because that's amazing. All right. Smack dab in the middle of the chart is the blue, and the blue is the millennial generation. What becomes really important here is that we can see visually it's the biggest generation. We know that it is the biggest generation, and they are active in the home buying market if they can be. The first red bar is the median age of 36 years old. That is the median age of a first-time home buyer. That's the oldest we've ever seen it. Why that's important is that traditionally we do see a first-time home buyer between the ages of 28 and 33 years old. So seeing a first-time home buyer this much older has a couple implications. One, we know how hard it is to purchase a home based on all the previous slides, lack of inventory, affordability, but then also thinking about things like rising rents and student care, student loan debt and childcare costs, everything that's holding back a potential home buyer from saving. What becomes really important though, and what I will say is a positive potential thing here, is that you can see there's a little peak in population. And that's right when we see traditionally people buying their first home. If those young adults could find a property to live in and be able to save for the down payment, they would absolutely be entering into homeownership. What is important to note here too is that this is putting a lot of pressure into the housing market because we don't have that inventory to support these young adults. In the yellow, so we're skipping over Gen Xers, but let's head to baby boomers for now. In the yellow, what we see is that this is the second biggest generation. You can see that visually pretty quickly here. The second red bar is the median age of 59 years old, and that is the median age of a repeat buyer in the market. If we actually look back at 1981, when we first started collecting this data on home buyer age, the median age of a repeat buyer was actually 36 years old. So we can see that there is a tremendous change that has happened here. That is potentially a lot of lost housing equity for that first-time home buyer who is older, but they are eventually entering the housing market. It does have some other implications here too. If we think about the needs of that home for that repeat buyer at 59 versus at 36, they could be looking at a different neighborhood, a different home type, different expectations of how long they plan to live there. All of those factors could change. The Gen X generation. It is the smallest generation and it is wedged in between these two huge generations. I'll give you some information on them on just the next slide here. So this is home buyers over the last decade and the share of each of them. And what we can see here is that for 8 years, keeping the colors exactly the same as last chart, and the blue, the millennial generation, was the biggest generation of home buyers for 8 solid years. In the last year, they dropped off, and now it's just 28% of buyers. On the flip side, what we can see is that the baby boomer generation is now the biggest generation of home buyers. So they have overtaken them. Again, when we think about the multiple bid situation that could happen, we know that these all cash buyers are more likely to be baby boomers. They're more likely to be able to compete in the housing market. And so they are going to take them over. I think that the pressure that we see in the housing market is going to be seen for the next few years because of the lack of inventory, but also just because of ages. Just because we know in the next couple of years, every single boomer is going to be over the age of 60. They're going to be looking for a retirement property if they're not already there. They're going to be thinking about where they want to live, and that's going to put pressure on the housing market that we haven't seen before. All right, Gen Xers. Gen Xers are the purple line. They're pretty steady in the housing market at 24%. And so I don't have so much to say about them. What I will say is that as a smaller generation, they are active in the housing market. They're in their peak earning years. They likely are looking for a home that has children under the age of 18, perhaps over the age of 18 who boomerang back, an elderly relative, all very likely to be in their home as they encounter the housing market. The green is the Gen Zers, and they are late teens, early 20s. They are sneaking into the housing market, but they're doing so largely with financial help from mom and dad. And I think this is really interesting because they are wanting homeownership, but they have to have that financial help to get there. In the last couple of years, we have seen a lot of young adults boomerang home. It has been the highest share of young adults living at home that the US has actually ever seen. And it is starting to trail off now. What I would say is that this has given a lot of opportunity for these young adults to save for a down payment and to really think about where they want to live and what they want out of their next home. We actually have seen 27% of first-time homebuyers moved directly from their family member's home into homeownership. This is the highest share we've ever seen. I think this has given them an opportunity to skip rent, to pay down their student loan debt or their car or whatever they had and save for a down payment. It seems to be a way for successful homebuyers to really be able to encounter today's very expensive housing market is to do this. And this is a much higher share than what we have seen historically. I want to give you just a few demographic changes that we are seeing here. One is if we look at the US overall, we actually have seen a pretty huge decline in marriage rates in this country. So, looking back at the 1960s, 70% of American adults were married. Today, just about half of American adults are married. There both is a graying of divorce. People are getting divorced later on. But there also is just a delay in getting married for young adults. And they're just choosing to either not get married at all or do so at a later age. And when we look at home buyer activity, what we can see is this is really reflected. Last year, half of first-time home buyers were married couples compared to 75% back in 1985. So a dramatic drop. We also have seen a rise in single women, especially, but also single men active in the housing market. On the other side of this equation, too, is that we have seen a rise in unmarried couples and also a rise in roommates. I think this is really interesting for a lot of reasons here as we look at this chart. If we start with roommates, I think that they're probably pooling their cash together and saying, well, I want to enter into homeownership, but I can't afford to do so. And I'm tired of renting with you. So why don't we just pool our cash? And this way we can buy a place together. Unmarried couples traditionally are younger than what we actually see for married couples. They also are the most likely generation or the most likely household type to actually double up with family first and then go to purchase a home. So maybe their family's just ready to get rid of them as a couple. I don't know. Singles. I think this is interesting because as we see single men and single women entering into the real estate market, they are honestly struggling to do so. They have a single income. So in a multiple bid situation, not likely to be being able to compete with married couples out there who can put down a heftier down payment perhaps than these single buyers. They're having to save for longer periods of time, often making sacrifices to get there, like taking on a second job or selling a car and skipping that vacation. All of those sacrifices really to enter into homeownership. So it's really a different type of home buyer that we're seeing here. Another one that we are seeing too is a drop in home buyers who have a child under the age of 18 in their house. When we look back at this in 1985, 58% of home buyers had a kid under the age of 18, and today it's just 31%. I think this is fascinating, and I think it speaks to a higher share of repeat buyers in the market, but also that repeat buyer is older. We also know that birth rates overall in the US are down. So all of these factors converging just mean there's fewer home buyers with a kid. What I also think is interesting here is the implications to this. We already see in the data that the priority of that perfect school and the distance to the perfect school is less of a priority today than what it has been in the past, just because there's fewer home buyers who have a child. We also know that this could mean less moves on the table. So if you have a growing family or if you're an empty nester, those are two potential moves. We also know that it could change what you need within the home. So perhaps that extra bedroom is now the home office, where in the past it would have been a child's bedroom. And I think those are differences that could be pretty sticky right now when we look at the rising share of baby boomers in the housing market and the drop in the share of first-time home buyers. The other implication that's out there, and this is not a one-to-one comparison, but this overall is what's happening in the US overall. 40% of US households have a kid under the age of 18, and 70% have a pet. And I know this is a much lighter note, but what I would argue is that we are seeing the importance of pets has been rising as a factor of where that buyer is going to live. Several years ago, we saw that 15% of home buyers put their pet as a factor for their neighborhood choice, and today it's 19%. For single women and for unmarried couples, those two rising shares, we actually see it's closer to a third of them are factoring in their pet into their neighborhood choice. We also know that there is a share of realtors out there who are actually saying, I have worked with a client in the past couple of years who actually are moving solely because of their pet. So certainly a factor. I want to give you a few baby boomer facts here. I actually had the opportunity about a year ago to travel and see you all in person in Hawaii. And that was just such an incredible opportunity. And I brought with me actually my godmother, who was 81 at the time, and her sister, who was 79. And we just had an amazing time. They live in Seattle, and so it was a little easier for them to get there than from DC. My husband and my sister were working, and so that was just not a possibility. And they were just happy to join me. I tell you this, not just because you live in such an amazing and gorgeous place that everyone should want to and does want to go to, but also because this was my first opportunity really traveling with them. And I had lots of expectations from this trip, like reading and going to the pool and going to the beach and relaxing. And their expectations going into this trip were very, very, very different. They wanted to go ziplining, of which I said no. They heard in the hotel that we were at that you could go diving with sharks, and I said no. We did go hiking and we did do a lot of touring around, but it was just definitely a different trip than what I thought it was going to be. I tell this story because I have to say, in looking at them as homeowners, they are very different than perhaps the data would suggest for past generations at the exact same age. And let's just take a look at the data. Okay, so when we look at today's seniors, as they buy a home, the myths that we have for seniors are very, very different than reality. They feel very comfortable moving many states away and following the grandbaby. The number one reason to actually buy a home for all generations today is to be closer to friends and family. So as we look at this and we think about what is a priority for them, for seniors today and for young millennials, it is to be close to friends and family. Downsizing does not seem to be a trend at all that we're really seeing in the data. In fact, they seem to want a similar size home than they were in before. They feel comfortable with that type of space. Also, the available inventory that we have is likely generating that as well. They are very much wanting a newer home, one that has tech bells and whistles, green bells and whistles. They have the money to buy those features and they are embracing that. We often think of those things as a young person's priority, but today we actually see it as something that seniors are embracing. They're also purchasing a home, often with roommates. It's single digits, but I think it's important to note, just because I think it's unusual to what our expectations are, that they would be living by themselves or with their partner, not necessarily with a roommate, but this is something that we're seeing in the data. Oops. The other one that I think is important too, as we talk about seniors, is to look at multi-generational buying. This is something that we also see is up. It's at 14% of all buyers. But the number one reason to do this is actually to bring an elderly relative into the home. Now, it could be for elder care, absolutely, but it also could be for childcare help. It could be for family support, pooling incomes. I think there's a lot of priorities that are being met here. But this is something that seems to be quite sticky as we look at this, and I don't think this is going away. especially as we look at the cost of homes, the cost of childcare, the want to bring an elderly relative into the home as opposed to in a nursing home or assisted living. Just coming out of COVID, I think that there's a big priority for family support. When we look at different generations as well, what we can see is that multi-generational buying to pool incomes is it's becoming more common, but also for an adult child to boomerang back or someone who's never left, all of that is incorporated into this multi-generational buying that has been going up. So I'm going to give you two not great slides, and then I'm going to give you two better slides. So the two not great. One is that the median tenure in home has gone up. People are holding onto their homes for a longer period of time. I've alluded to this already, but just looking at the data, people used to move every 6 to 7 years, and now they're moving every 10. So this is quite a difference in the data. When we look at the expectations of recent buyers, now I will say that this is dated and we will have fresh data in a few weeks, but looking at the data that we have, people are expecting to stay in their home for a longer period of time, whether that's 18 or 15 years. The expectations are longer than what they were when it was single digits. What I will say though, is that even though this home buyer recently purchased this home and they plan to stay put, I don't know that this is reality. People move because a life change happens, whether that's a new baby or a new job or marriage or divorce. These things do happen and they will upend someone. So I think we could see some changes here, even though this is the expected tenure, it may not be reality. What I would keep in mind though, and what I would encourage you to do is that these individuals may have purchased a home recently from you. They're still in contact with you. Make sure you have a list of contractors and remodelers at hand. It is one of the hardest things to find as a homeowner is that trusted remodeler, that trusted contractor. And if that's a point of contact, that's great because they're going to refer you on because they had a good experience from you and they're going to want to talk to you again and say how great that was. The agent role on the good side here, we are seeing buyer's use of agent is up. People want a buyer's agent. They want someone to help them through that transaction, to help negotiate and to help find them that right home and understand what is going on in the process because this is a new process for them. Even if they've recently purchased in the last 10 years as a repeat buyer, 10 years ago is a very long time ago and the market is very different than it was then. They need your help and they want your help. When we look at sellers agents, we do see that that is also up. People want a seller's agent to help them through that process, and they are going to full service agent, someone who can help them price their home competitively, find a qualified buyer, sell within a specific time frame, market the home, everything that you can think of, including how do I fix up my home for sale? This has all been quite important to sellers, and they want your expertise throughout that process. Right. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Jessica. That was a lot of information. Looks like we have one question here. Great presentation. Thank you. Would you please comment on the NAR lawsuit judgment this morning? I don't know if
Yeah.
that's your area, but maybe you can give us a referral to where we can get more information, Jessica.
Yeah, absolutely. So I honestly, I'm learning as much information probably in real time as you all are too, to tell you the truth. Competition.realtor is the best place to go for the most up-to-date information from our attorneys. I am not an attorney, you can tell from what I just presented on, but I would definitely encourage you to check that out. It's competition.realtor. And I think more information has likely honestly been posted while I've been chatting here with you all.
Hey, very good.
Thank you.
Next question. How about walkability? Is that a trend? I apologize if you went over this. I missed the first few minutes. Thank you.
No apologies at all. I did not go over walkability. That is a trend, especially when we think about someone who, oh, great. NAR sent out an update just now. Perfect. I will read it to you when we're off. When we look at walkability, that is a trend. I would say for folks who are buying in city centers, for sure, What I would say to that is that we often think of city centers is more of a young person where they want to be with smaller condos and such, but we actually see the people who are buying in city centers looking for walkability and neighborhood amenities. Those are often actually seniors because they can afford to do so. Also, it provides perhaps less upkeep than a single family home may. So we do see that that's important. Walkability also really important to people with pets. And I know that that's a lighter note, but that's what we see in the data.
Interesting, interesting. Hey, I don't think I see any more questions, so we're gonna let you go so that you can go get dressed up and go to your Halloween thing. But I did want to let everybody remind everybody that we are distributing the recording later on today or maybe early tomorrow. We will have the slides. So I did see a chat in there. Can we see the last slide? We won't do that at this time because we want to end on time. However, we will be sending the slides out as well. Hey, thank you so much, Jessica. We so appreciate all you do for us, and thank you for the information you provided. Have a wonderful and great Halloween.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Aloha.